All right. Hello and good morning, everybody. Thanks for logging in for our third webinar in our Advanced Air Mobility webinar series. My name is Jackson Piper. I'm a program coordinator with AirTap at the University of Minnesota. This month's webinar is called City Planning Perspectives with a System Plan. Like other webinars in our series, this webinar is sponsored by MnDOT's Office of Aeronautics and is administered by the Airport Technical Assistance Program, or AirTap, at the Center for Transportation Studies at the University of Minnesota. I'm sure many of you have tuned in for the first two and are familiar with AirTap, so I am going to skip right through these slides. Again, this is the third in our almost year-long webinar series. You can see our dates here. You can also see all the dates on our website at airtap.umn.edu. This and each of our webinars will be recorded and will be made available to watch later on our website. So you can visit the website and see the August and September recordings online. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. This, again, is being recorded. We also have a chat and a Q&A feature. You can use the chat to communicate with others in the webinar, introduce yourself, etc. Please use the Q&A feature to ask a question to me or to either of our other hosts. I'll be monitoring that, and if questions come along throughout the presentation, I'll just stop Finn and we'll get to those questions. So you can put those questions there, please. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our special guest, Finn Bonsett, who is currently the National Director of Aviation Planning for McFarland Johnson, an airport and transportation planning and design firm. Finn is an accomplished airport development consulting professional with both technical and managerial and leadership experience for the past 26 years. In the spirit of promoting aviation, Finn enjoys teaching and has held an adjunct professor position at the Florida Institute of Technology, College of Aeronautics for the last 15 years. So, Finn, please take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction, Jackson, and thank you so much for having me, and thanks to Joe Block for the invitation. I'm going to go ahead and share screen, and I'll get started right away. Let me see. Please current share. There we go. And just let me see. Just let me know when you see it, Jackson, on your screen. Give me 1 second. There we go. Does that work for you?
Yep, it's coming up now.
Fantastic. All right, excellent. So again, thanks for the introduction, Jackson. Good morning, everyone. My name, as Jackson said, is Finn Bonsett. I am with McFarland Johnson. I've been in this business being airport planning and design for about 27 years, and have recently, I'd say in the last 4 years or so, really gotten into the advanced air mobility space. In terms of what airports are looking at, what cities are looking at, and I've been invited to speak about some of my experiences. So without further ado, I'll get started with that. So, and again, I want to make sure that the slideshow now progresses. So there we go. Jackson, can you see my slides progressing? I want to make sure we're good to go on that.
Yes, you're good.
Perfect. Excellent. So what I'd like to talk about today, a couple of things. We've already done our introductions. Give you a quick State of the Union industry perspective, kind of where we stand in advanced air mobility, what the landscape's like as we're progressing here in the United States, but also give you an international perspective, and then talk about a couple of case studies. My first case study will be about Syracuse Hancock International Airport in upstate New York. That's a very interesting one because they've actually added advanced air mobility in their master planning efforts, and I was able to work with them quite a bit on implementing that type of initiative. And then the second one that I'd like to talk about is a project I got to work on here in Orlando, Florida, on a smart cities master plan project. So when we're talking about smart cities, we're talking about future-proofing cities, sustainability, and trying to integrate multimodal transportation, including all modes that are available, including advanced air mobility. So that's a really, really interesting one. And I also have some preliminary concepts of what Orlando International Airport, for example, is looking at. And then the third case study that I wanted to bring in is a review of Beta. Beta is an OEM, so they're a manufacturer of conventional takeoff and landing electric aircraft and eVTOLs, vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. So that's a really interesting one, especially as the company I work for now, McFarland Johnson, is actually providing permitting and installation services for some of their electrification planning for their particular aircraft. And then at the end, hopefully we'll get a chance to talk a little bit and give you guys about 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A, and then we'll wrap it up. So that's the idea today, and I hope you'll enjoy it. So let's get right to the first slide. So just to give you an idea of the state of the union and where we are, I got into this right around the time COVID happened, and there was a lot of large scale outlook potential for advanced air mobility. But the latest and greatest is getting some recent figures. The global electric VTOL, eVTOL aircraft market is estimated to reach about $700.5 million dollars in 2032 from 27.5 million in 2023, and that's global. So it's starting. I think the initial projections were a little bit higher, but it is growing at a rate of 38.2%. And it's one of those things where if you follow the money, the investments that are being made in the industry, that makes sense. If you look at the airlines, if you look at United Airlines, American, Delta, they've invested about $2 billion each in their respective OEM manufacturers that they want to start working with, and that's huge. So if you follow the money, then this is definitely an industry that looks like it's going to happen here quite shortly. So the growth in global electric VTOL aircraft it's expected to be driven by the increasing number of smart cities. So again, a lot of cities are looking for that sustainable, resilient, and net zero type of approach, and that's where these vehicles really enter into the fold. And again, just the overall idea of sustainable transportation, not only like electric trucking, electric vehicles, but also electric aircraft, or in the future when we're talking about different energies like hydrogen, hybrid engines, all this technology that's also being invested in. So it's really interesting to see the growth here and the expectation, and it may very well top 700 million or go beyond that, depending on how fast this grows. So having said that, if the global electric aircraft market is observing rising investment across all the platforms, which drives the investments across the ecosystem, right, such as ground infrastructure and battery technology. However, if you think about battery technology, what's really limiting the progression of vertical takeoff and landing aircraft is the actual battery technology itself. Now, of course, battery technology is being enhanced. But the current ones that are being used, the lithium ion, the lithium sulfur, and lithium phosphate ones, are insufficient to provide power for long range type of transportation. So having personally been to the Paris Air Show, where some of the working models like the volocopters are starting to operate. Same thing with some of the Joby applications. The range is between 40 miles and maybe 100 miles if you go vertical. And that is because when you go vertical, you lose between 20 and 30% on takeoff, just taking off vertically with all those rotors spinning. And then it's the same thing for vertical landing. So the range right now, if we're looking at regional air transportation and with vertical aircraft, it's not there yet. But again, we've got to assume that the battery technology is going to be enhanced in the next couple of years. And maybe with the advent of hydrogen, that you could have hybrid engines and increase your range that way as well. So then the question is ECSTOL, okay, or basically electric conventional short takeoff and landing, so that's an aircraft that just regularly takes off, is that the answer? And if you look at Beta Technologies, and I'll talk about Beta a little bit later in the slide, that's where they're putting their money. Because if you take off conventionally with the same batteries that we have now, instead of having that vertical component losing that energy, you can actually extend that range to like 300 to 400 miles is what they're saying. And that's already been proven by that concept. So we may very well see these electric aircraft taking off conventionally first, especially when it comes to maybe regional cargo and things like that, before we really start seeing longer vertical takeoff and landing regionally. So it's an interesting concept, right? And that's what a company like Beta is already installing chargers across certain networks in certain states to make that happen. So just the third bullet point there, the regulation for operating the eVTOL aircraft in urban areas and developing the vertiports is still in development stages, right? So the regulations are still catching up. The technology is essentially there, but the regulations in terms of zoning, where these things can fly, that's delaying basically the eVTOLs from entering the market. Right now, the models like Joby Aviation, that is a point-to-point model, and they're going to use existing helicopter routes, existing helipads. That's the first type of model. But if we really want to take these things across cities at low altitude, which again is the idea here, the regulations, the permitting, the air routes have to all be there, and that's not even mentioning the ground infrastructure that might be required to make sure that these vehicles are safe and are not conflicted with other airspace issues. So what's interesting about that, and my last little point there in red, I was recently, and some of you may have been part of it, but the FAA had an industry day for vertiports. That was about a week ago, week and a half ago or so. And they were basically talking about the newest and greatest guidelines for vertiport design. And what I got away from that, or what I got from that, was that there was a lot of technical people on that call, and they were asking about ranges, the type of vehicles, how they were going to operate, and the FAA just did not have a lot of answers yet. And the FAA stance was, well, we don't have all the info because it's so competitive. The manufacturers don't want to disclose their secrets on the type of operation they're going to have. So how can we make guidelines for implementation? So that in itself is going to delay this market a little bit more once we start understanding how do we operate these things point to point. So I thought that was really interesting. It was a great FAA element, but that shows you that the FAA doesn't know everything yet, and the manufacturers are pretty coy about sharing that information. Okay, this slide right here, I just wanted to give some perspectives because if we look back to 2020, right? So right during COVID, there was a survey done of 2,100 aerospace industry executives that were surveyed by Roland Berger. It's a famous business survey element. Out of those 2,100 industry executives, 13% were expecting it within 5 years. So now it's almost 2025. 51% were saying that it expect to happen between 5 and 10 years, which I think is more spot on. 34% were saying more than 10 years, and then 2% say that it would never happen. And there are still a couple of naysayers out there, right? But I really think if you look at where things are going from a regulatory point of view, both Beta and Joby are already looking to implement some of their operations, their commercial operations, trying to get that commercial certification probably mid to late 2025, if not 2026. And we'll start seeing maybe a couple of different routes here and there in some of the highly populated areas in the United States. So places like San Francisco, places like New York, Miami's looking at it, and places like LA, of course, right? So some of the really big, larger cities where this is prominent, that's probably where we start seeing some of the first. Joby and companies like Archer and other ones operating in the U.S. What I wanted to show here is that what's it going to look like? Is there a proof of concept? And yes, there is. And I put in capital letters here, EHang. And for those of you that don't know what EHang is, this is our Chinese competitor. So EHang already has a pilotless eVTOL air operator certificate from their CAAC, which is basically their FAA. They have a full working model, full concept. They're already starting flights. They have tourist flights. They have city-to-city flights. So just imagine, if you will, if we had an FAA that wasn't so constrained in terms of trying to get these things certified. The concept works. It's already happening in China. They're doing remote pilot. It's absolutely incredible, right? So it's there. For all the naysayers that are out there, the process, the system, it works. It's just a matter of the FAA and the regulators catching up here in the U.S. And I'm not knocking the FAA. If you think about what the FAA has to do, not only do they have to certify 500 to 600 of these new OEM concepts in the U.S., while in China there's one right now, but they also have to certify all of the commercial airplane variants that are coming out. So all the new Airbus variants, the new Boeing variants, the new Embraer variants. So they've got their hands full. So essentially it comes down to a regulatory staffing issue and just a general, hey, we're super busy with everything else going on. And imagine all the problems that FAA is having now with the Boeing certifications, the Pratt and Whitney engine issues now that, for example, Spirit Airlines is suffering from. Trying to just get the regulatory processes in place for aircraft manufacturing is really what's hampering the FAA. So just to show it's coming, and it's going to be interesting. Okay, so that brings me to case study number 1. And Jackson, Joe, I'm not monitoring the chat, but I just want to stop here if there's any questions so far.
No questions.
All right, excellent. Then I'll continue. All right, case study number one. This one's near and dear to me as I've done quite a bit of work with Syracuse Airport up in upstate New York. If you look at that top left-hand picture, that's a picture that was taken during an industry day where we had not only the Southwest Airlines 737s putting on a parade for us. Actually, they were just operating commercially, but we had the MQ-9 Reaper drones, which is basically the military. They're on site. They're on the airfield. And you can also see in the background there the Beta electric conventional short takeoff and landing vehicle in the background. They came in for a demonstration. But Syracuse is unique because they've already basically had these drone type operations that fly out of the airport. So if you ever fly into Syracuse, if you're flying in a 737 commercially, sometimes you can see these things with you in the pattern, in the traffic pattern. And they're just operating like a normal aircraft, except it's remote piloted. So which is a neat case, right? So Syracuse is a good test bed for how commercial operations work with remote or UAS drone operations. So it's a nice little test bed. So and as you can see that they already have in the Syracuse area, they have a 50-mile drone corridor. It's actually the first US FAA certified drone corridor between Syracuse Airport and Rome Airport. And as you can see in that picture on the bottom of my screen, it's a drone corridor established based on certain radar areas, right? So these drones can be controlled, they can be seen, they can be monitored by a system, and therefore making low altitude operations safe between those two areas. And that puts Syracuse in an interesting spot also in terms of, well, if there's drones flying, and then we're talking about package delivery drones right now, how would that work from a cargo or a passenger perspective? So in that sense, it's a neat airport to implement that. And so where I'm going with that is the airport is doing a master plan as we speak. They're about the end of it. I was involved in the process quite a bit, but from the very, very beginning, they took advanced air mobility considerations into the actual planning for the airport. So I want to talk about that a little bit and what that looks like. The last thing I'll say on this slide, if you look at the bottom right, it is actually at the airport in the terminal, they actually have an operations center for all UAS activity in the area. And they monitor basically all of the different UAS type elements, whether it's military, civilian, commercial, in that 50-mile corridor. And what's interesting too is these guys have actually created a digital twin of the master plan so that they can understand the future amount of advanced air mobility operations versus military versus commercial, so they can test the concepts of having these new advanced air mobility facilities. So it's really neat. It's super forward thinking. If you're ever in the area, go check that out. It is in the terminal. You can see through the windows. It's absolutely amazing. And the company that's doing that's a nonprofit, and it's called New Air. They're just fantastic. Okay, hopefully this is coming okay up on your screen. It's not I try to find a better quality image, but you can get the general idea. So what you're looking at now is the layout for Syracuse International Airport. So essentially it's kind of a V configuration. The terminal's in the middle. You can see some of the terminal expansion that's slated for the future in purple. But essentially, if you look to the south, there's a planned general aviation facility. And just south of west of the purple terminal areas, you will see two squares there. And that is, I'm going to zoom in on that here in a second. But that's the idea behind having an advanced air mobility facility for future passengers right near the terminal with a link to the terminal itself. And before I go to that, I just want you to take a look at the surrounding airspace or the surrounding runways. Of course, if I'm talking to airport folks here, you should be familiar with Part 77, Imaginary Civil Services, or airspace services, essentially. And the consideration for a vertiport also has to be taken into account to remain clear of those services so it can operate independently. So the ideas that we had here at Syracuse, the first one, it would be a passenger one, and then the second one would be a cargo type of operation, which is on the right side of the screen. And I'm going to zoom in now so you guys can see what I'm talking about. So this is the one, if I go back, this one is located just right of the, you guys can see the new cargo facility. Let's say if you look at the purple terminal in the middle and you go all the way to the right, to the east in this case, and you see a couple of cargo aircraft parked there. just to the north where those two boxes are atop, that's the proposed advanced air mobility cargo vertiport. So what that looks like is there's going to be a cargo loading facility. You've got auto parking. You have, let's see, looks like 8 different eVTOL parking positions. So you have storage facilities, which means that you have 4 bays that are there for maintenance or charging. You've got airfield access, and then you have basically the two vertipads in the middle where you operate towards the east to stay away from all the commercial facilities. So that's the idea behind creating a cargo vertiport. Cargo is especially in the region of Syracuse. It's quite rural in some areas during winter months. A lot of the roads shut down. So just cargo and packaging to fly those out to some of the more rural communities themselves that have airports. They can operate out of this facility and go in that direction towards the Adirondacks. So that's one of the ideas here. For example, Beta and some of the other OEMs have already started looking at making deals with UPS and FedEx for cargo package flying as well, using vertiports or even using just regular runways with conventional electric aircraft. So that's one of them. The other one is located close to the terminal. So if you remember the picture from before, if you look to the right of your screen, there's a little bit of a purple area. So the idea is that's the end of the terminal itself, the passenger terminal, and you would have a corridor, a connector that would go through a passenger terminal facility or a very small one for advanced air mobility, and then you would have your holding bays and then your two vertiports or vertipads, excuse me, where you would operate towards the west to stay out of the runway areas and the airspace in that area in itself. And again, these designs that you're seeing on the screen, these are preliminary designs based on feedback that we received from OEMs, from some of the vertiport operators. And that's a general idea of what they'll look like. So you'll have, for example, 2 pads to have some redundancy. You have some storage areas where you can charge aircraft or work on them. And then also process your passengers and get the passengers walking out to your vertiport areas. So again, this is a master plan element. So master plan being higher level type planning, but at the same time, the airport is reserving these areas so that they can actually, if there's an operator that wants to come in and provide advanced air mobility services, this is where they can operate, and they also aim to get that site ready to go in terms of utilities and things of that nature, and that's what I want to mention next. So just to get you an idea, right? So one of the biggest issues, or challenge is probably a better word for that, is the amount of electricity needed to operate a vertiport. Now, Syracuse is an interesting case. This is directly from the master plan, and in the master plan we have something called planning activity levels. That's a PAL. And basically those are trigger levels for the airport to begin planning or constructing some of the infrastructure that they need. So again, with those planning activity levels, there's also an increase. So if you look at PAL 1 versus PAL 3, that's an assumed increase in the amount of passengers or operations that you'll have with your vertiport operation. So what we looked at was, for example, based on the existing grid in Syracuse, that you would already need about 6 megawatts of additional power just to start running that operation, which sounds like a lot, but at the same time, this airport is already at a capacity level that needs to be enhanced. So adding that into it and adding a vertiport operation to your airport is going to be an electrical challenge. So one of the things that we started looking at with that, because the airport doesn't have the means capacity, is they're looking at something called a microgrid. We may have heard it before. So in terms of microgrids, taking a look at this map again, and from a planning perspective, we started looking at, well, what's a good place for a microgrid? Where does it tie into the grid, for example? And we came up with, I believe, 6. So you can see 2 that are actually 3 that are close to the terminal, 1 that's kind of to the west, 1 to the east, and then 1 to the northwest, right? And just based on where current utilities are, current infrastructure, and the best developable land, the airport came up with an idea to the east where the star is on the right here. So alternative 5 is a potential microgrid in that area. And the airport's looking at that from a infrastructure development perspective, looking at costing and things like that. And there are a couple of options, and I thought this was interesting as well. And then I'll go to my next case study here for the sake of time. But there is actually a company called Alpha Structures. And Alpha Structures is basically a concession type microgrid. So they will build it for you, they will run it for you, they'll operate it for you based on a certain level of megawatts or kilowatts, whatever you want to call it. And then you get kickbacks from the amount of revenue or about from the amount of usage, right? So it's a cost sharing or profit sharing type scenario, but basically they get to run it, they build it, and they make the profits of it as well. So those are kind of options that airports that don't necessarily have the funding to install a microgrid, there's companies now that are willing to invest with private investment to get microgrids off the ground. So that was really interesting. That's still being courted right now. It's not 100% because the limitation is the amount that there's no flexibility in the amount of megawatts that they can provide. So I think that's really interesting. Okay. Case study two, for the sake of time and moving on here. My second case study here is the Orlando Smart Cities AAM integration study. So the concept there is that advanced air mobility planning is very important to the city of Orlando since it's such a multimodal facility. And think of there's light rail, there's a new rail line called Brightline. There is there's Disney World, of course. There's busing, there's taxis. And imagine now, okay, there's advanced air mobility to help the system be enhanced a little bit, and that's the integration. That's why they're so interested in this concept, especially if you think of the regional perspective. Orlando being central in Florida, there's also a link to Cape Canaveral, which is now the busiest cruise port in the U.S., I believe. So that those kind of connections, instead of having to drive an hour and a half from the airport, instead using advanced air mobility as one of the modes of transportation is high on their radar. So again, the focus being on multimodal integration, and one of the key elements just working on this, and that's number one, is get your stakeholders together, right? So that's stakeholder coordination and having workshops and understanding what people's needs are and how they can operate and work together. And the biggest solutions when it comes to a city is understanding what it would take to permit and get the correct zoning ordinances in place so that you can actually build a vertiport and start using it, or build any type of advanced air mobility infrastructure. All right, so moving on. So just to get you an idea, this is the city perspective, right? So again, Orlando's vision is not only to be one of the first cities with VTOL flights. It's very competitive now, if you haven't noticed, but to also be the first city to properly engage the community and set up operations and permitting of VTOL in a way that optimizes a transportation network for residents and visitors. So Orlando's being smart about that. And when I say stakeholders, the community is the biggest one. So already getting this idea, hey, this is coming, we're investing in this, what are your thoughts? We already started doing that as part of that city planning process. Okay, so again, it's just the purpose. We've talked about that already, but just that phase one that I was working on here is also understanding the anticipated impacts associated from advanced air mobility, but to really position the city with additional future-ready mobility options, right? So, but again, by identifying locations, supporting the movement of residents, business, and visitors. So it's just all this integrated plan. So that was part of it. So just going straight into it here. And so the phase one is currently done. Don't worry if you can't read this on the screen. Just wanted to, this is more of a, hey, this is an accessibility item. But the first phase basically was technical memorandums on regional transportation, environmental challenges and opportunities. So we took an overall perspective of what some of those challenges and opportunities were. An economic impact study of Geico Garage. There was a Geico Garage element that was already looking at advanced air mobility, so they had a precedence in starting this. There was also a NASA-related community planning annex, so NASA is involved with this, especially as they're close to the Cape. And then, of course, the initial stakeholder outreach and regional visioning. And then phase two, after we kind of understood a baseline of what the environment looked like, then we started looking at zoning and regulations. So that was part of phase two. And that also, of course, included agency coordination. So when we're talking about agency coordination, we're talking about the FAA, the Florida Department of Transportation, NASA, and a couple of other entities, even some of the space commercial space entities that may be interested in some point-to-point service as well. And then phase three, which is currently going on, now we're starting to look at travel demand scenarios, right? So now it gets into simulating, point-to-point traffic, what's impacting multimodal regional transportation, and other things like that. And then, of course, we start looking at vertiport target locations and additional stakeholder outreach. So that's phase three that's happening as we speak. So just to get you an idea of who was involved, like the stakeholder engagement part, and that's one of the things I'm going to say at the end as well, just as a precursor. The best thing to do up front if you're thinking about advanced air mobility in your area or region is to engage your stakeholders. You typically start with the state itself, the DOT, but all the elements that are in your region. So with the city of Orlando, they had all these different multimodal elements, even working with local airports. County governments, city governments, local governments, universities, bus firms, and OEMs, manufacturers, ports. So the first thing you really want to do is understand the lay of your land. Who would be a player in this? And that's exactly what we did. So one of the things that we did with those stakeholders, once we got everybody in a room, is kind of we did a survey to understand, hey, well, what are some of the issues here? What are your initial thoughts? And these were interesting, right? So you look at the screen here. Some of the feedback we got, of course, is noise. People are concerned about noise. The locations themselves, are they going to be a nuisance to where I live residentially, for example? But again, some of the larger percentage items were airspace. A lot of concerns about airspace, the equity, regional coordination, and of course, community acceptance. So that just means that if you are an airport, a city, or a state, you still want to try and engage the community and understand what would basically be a nuance to them. So these were very interesting things that we got as part of the first feedback, just to get things started and understanding, the pulse of the community, the pulse of the stakeholders, and what we need to focus on. So again, from a city perspective, some of the things that they came out with in terms of like the benefits of having VTOL is of course traffic. If there's traffic congestion, operate above independent roads, highways, things like that. It's environmentally friendly, which is big for sustainability. Infrastructure. So there's different connections, economic drivers, and not community dividers, right? So we wanted to make sure that everything is integrated and connected properly. And then there's also flexible route options. So now you might be able to service underserviced communities, and that's an economic element as well, or socioeconomic element, if you will. So the mission profiles, and I'm going to go through a little bit quicker because my time is going pretty quick. I want to make sure I have some more time to talk about beta. But the mission itself, from the city perspective, was okay: city to city traffic, city taxi, which is point to point. For example, Disney World to the airport or Disney World to the city, things of that nature. Early networking opportunities were from vertiports to downtown Orlando. Lake Nona is a new developing, wealthier region that might be serviced by that as well. Convention center traffic. Orlando now is one of the largest convention center areas in the United States. Connections to the port with cruise ship passengers, connections with universities, and of course private development as well. And that's essentially the same as private helicopters for a large organization. So just to get you an idea, again, situated here, there is a vertiport element right near Orlando National Airport. It's in concept right now. But to get you an idea of the range here, in Orlando being pretty central, you've got the spaceport and everything on the East Coast. You've got Sarasota, but depending on the mileage, you could probably still reach Miami if the battery technology gets better. But there's just so many options for a state like Florida that has a lot of larger communities in the coastal areas, and link those to Orlando, where one of the main international airports is located as well. So in terms of the infrastructure challenge itself, right? So we talk about vertiports. We have to understand the demand. We have to understand the land requirements. So just, again, these are basic high-level planning elements. You need about 25,000 to 60,000 square feet to actually create a vertiport or add a vertiport for a proper operation. You need departure, approach procedures, curb the noise elements, and of course, you want to have a good experience for the passenger journey as well. So just to get an idea, these are some conceptual ones. These come from Lilium. Lilium is a German manufacturer. This particular model has 37 little electric jets in it. But again, this is kind of just give you an idea of what that would look like. As I said before, you've got some holding bays, you've got maintenance bays, you've got one area where these things are taking off and landing. But basically, you also need to provide for the charging infrastructure, and you need a little terminal as well. All right. So just to get you an idea of the different roles and what we've seen, the different types of operators. You have a transportation company, right? So that's a company that comes in and provides the transportation services. You have a vertiport operator, right? So they do ground operations, ground staff. They do the vertiports themselves, ground ops with fees. You have a developer that might be interested in it, and you have a land/property owner. So there's different roles that require different regulatory frameworks and things of that nature. So again, I don't want to go into too much detail for the sake of time, but those are kind of the elements that we came up with to understand the type of facilitator that we have in advanced air mobility. So just from a capacity, if we're thinking large scale vertiports, if again, this is large scale future public potentially, right? So between 750,000 to 1 million passengers, that would be the ultimate. Rooftop construction costs are between 10 to 25 million. That's a range that we came up with. If we're talking about ground construction with electrification, you're looking probably about a $3 million investment, probably a little bit more than that if you add property fees into it and things like that. So what's next? Again, getting AAM to take off in Orlando. Again, I am, for the sake of time, I'm going to go through these quickly. But it's essentially policy work, right? So even in Florida, in Orlando, there was some policies already related to old school vertiports, which were based on mechanical type V-22 Osprey type vehicles for commercial development. But essentially, what this says here, without reading it all verbatim here, is that this particular group, the city, is going to be working on their zoning ordinances and permitting elements to allow for specific vertiport planning. Again, this is based on zoning districts. This is just to give you an example. In Orlando, there's conditional use type zoning, which does allow vertiports. So that does give us a way in to allow for vertiport planning. And again, that's one of those things, rezoning, renaming them, making sure it applies to the current regulatory process. That's one of the challenges that we have. I'm going to skip a conditional use permit. This is a little bit too wordy here, but essentially that is that in for vertiport planning, and that's where they're looking to make those changes. Of course, if you're looking at a city perspective, not only do you have to worry about the city elements, but you also have to worry about the state elements, and that's important as well. The Florida Department of Transportation has a specific process for heliport type permitting, and we're envisioning that it's going to stay pretty similar with some particular nuances to the FAA guidelines for designing a vertiport. So this approval process should be pretty similar to what you're doing in Minnesota and other states, but this is the Florida one here. So again, very FAA oriented with the permitting, and then you also have to get the sign off from the state. Okay, real quick, I want to show you what Orlando is thinking. So Orlando International Airport, one of the stakeholders, is also looking at some potential advanced air mobility. There's Vision A is where there's a train station right now. That's the bright line that now ties in and is operable at the airport. That's one area to have a vertiport. And then there's another area east of the field, Vision B, is where they want to create basically a technology center that has advanced air mobility. So what that looks like, this is the one that's near the train station. Orlando, if you've ever been to Orlando, there's a lot of water. There's a lot of little ponds and lakes. So they want to use some of that. And this one would be one it's nice, it's safe, it's away from things, and to have a vertiport right off of the train station that's there. So you can link, people can come from Miami, come with the Bright Line, go into the Orlando station, and then from here fly to the city or fly to Disney World or something to that effect. The other one that they want to do, one second, there we go, is the east side of the field. It's near a cargo road, it's near a major highway. And if you look to the bottom of the screen, that's called an Aerospace Center of Excellence. So that's essentially all the different technology elements to get advanced air mobility in and out of the airport. And they've got a pretty big campus on the side of the airport that could work really well. And that's kind of similar to what's happening in the Middle East with Dubai, Skyports, for example, that has a very large scale vertiport potential facilities. And that could be a nice major hub for the airport away from all the other commercial aircraft operations. Okay, let's see here. Just to get you an idea, so that Aerospace Center of Excellence they want to have a partnership with elements such as Northrop Grumman, Blue Origin, Space Elements, General Dynamics. I mean, these, Boeing, different universities, Florida Tech, Embry-Riddle. I mean, it's a pretty huge collaborative that could potentially be built there. So just to get you an idea of creating these type of facilities. All right. So I'm going pretty quick. I've got about 5 or 6 more minutes, and then we'll do a Q&A here if that's possible. I think I've got a little bit more time. But my third case study here is Beta. And Beta is a very forward-thinking OEM, or is a manufacturer of electric aircraft, or both vertical and conventional. And the reason I'm mentioning these guys is because I had a chance to visit them. They're out of Burlington, Vermont, and they have an incredible facility up there. But basically, they focus. They can do both. They have a convertible aircraft, and what you're seeing on the screen is what this thing looks like. It's flying. It's operational. It works. I've seen it. It's quiet as can be. I mean, it's probably, I'd say, half the noise or less than a helicopter. But again, it's based on an actual animal called the skill, I believe. But it's really neat. It's a working concept. It's efficient. It's a proven model. And right now the applications for it are cargo, military, and passenger. And that fourth bullet point, I just want to highlight that. What's the secret to their success? And I can tell you this: when I went to the facility and visited there, it's all engineering all the time, right? So Boeing back in the day used to be all engineering. Then a lot of finance folks took over and look at all the problems they're having now. But they're really, you can tell that it's engineering first, and that's beyond everything. That's how they operate. Okay. So just to get you an idea, so they want to start commercial operations in 2025. Hopefully they'll get there. Again, it's an FAA element, but it's coming. They've already done their prototypes. They've started doing cargo flights already, flying medical support missions. That's already being used. And they also have some potential contracts with UPS and some elements in the United Arab Emirates as well. They have two different models. They've got the CX300 and the Alia 250. That's actually me. I got to fly the simulator, and I can tell you, I'm not a helicopter pilot. I am a commercial rated pilot, but that thing was easy to fly, super simple. It was kind of like a helicopter with a collective, but a lot simpler because you've got 4 different rotor blades, and it just makes it so stable. And I thought it was just a great experience. But just to get you an idea of cost, right? So everybody asks, well, what are these things going to cost? What's the difference between an aircraft that uses jet fuel and this type of aircraft? But if you look on the screen here, Beta found that energy costs for a flight might be around $16 to $20 for electricity, compared with jet A fuel costs of between $600 and $700 for a similar sized turbine type engine. And the maintenance on this is so low because the actual engine itself, the electric engine, doesn't have a lot of moving components to it. And therefore, the maintenance cost, the longevity of the motors are also way better than a turbine or conventional type of jet aircraft or propeller aircraft. And that's why this business model, I think, would work from a regional perspective and for airports as well. How they do charging, it's really interesting. So this is what the charging model looks like. As a matter of fact, our company, McFarland Johnson, is working on this throughout the state of New York and in New England as well. These are being, a lot of FBOs are looking at installing these. I believe there's already 15 installed across the states. And so they're creating a network right now that ties directly into the aircraft. And what you typically see are 3 units. This is what you're looking at now is the electrical unit, but they also have a chiller unit. That's for the that's when the aircraft is actually loading up, that there's a HVAC unit so that the folks that are in the aircraft, because it takes a little bit of time. I think it's like a 15 to 30-minute charge, so that they stay, that they have air, that they have cooling air, but also a coolant itself for the batteries for when that process is going on. So it's a 3-pronged approach. And what that looks like is, so here's the aircraft. That's basically, there's this dispenser. It's parked in an area there. And then you have the chiller, the coolant, the charger all in one, connected to the aircraft through 1 or 2 different hoses and lines. So I've seen it in process. It's very quick. It's very easy. Anybody could do this. And these are the things that are being installed at quite a number of airports. Okay. One last thing, as I said before, this visit was amazing, and I truly believe that Beta is at the forefront for a few reasons. They've got the best and brightest, very young workforce. It's engineering focused. You can bring your dog, you can bring your cat, you can bring any animals, bring your kids. They're around all day. They've got facilities, so they're all about happy engineers. But bullet number four is what's really interesting. Every single person that works at this plant has access to any aircraft on the flight line and get instruction in it. They have, I believe, 8 to 10 on-call flight instructors, which means that they want their engineers to understand how something flies. So it's not a mandate, but they allow anybody to get that feeling, that understanding of what it takes to fly an aircraft, and it makes everybody a stronger engineer. And I think that's just so forward thinking. They have all the different types of meetings, the airing of grievances, whatever you call it. I saw that in action. They have a very set way of developing and being efficient in terms of constructive criticism. All their tools, their equipment is manufactured on site. They actually have their own 3D printers, their own tools that they're designing specifically for these aircraft. It's all sustainable. The whole place is basically 100% sustainable, I believe, except for some of the conventional aircraft fuel. It's health food oriented, and it's just when I walked around there, I mean, you can tell these guys are going to be successful. So, and the only reason I plug that is because I've never really seen that in a manufacturing facility. I've been to Boeing, I've been to Airbus, I've been to Embraer, but this is just an exciting time, and it's coming. So it's just fantastic. So my final takeaways, and I'm looking at the clock right here, 10:48, so that'll leave us a good 10 minutes for any Q&A. And I apologize for the letters for some reason are spread out here. But if you're an airport or operator that's interested in advanced air mobility, based on the state of the industry and what I just showed you with what Beta's doing, what EHang's doing, Joby and others, the time is now to start planning. And I think a lot of that planning starts with understanding the lay of the land. What do you have available? What are your facilities at the airport? Do you need more electricity? Can you have the infrastructure? Do you have the market? Do you have other areas close by that would be good for point-to-point traffic? Is it an augmentation of your general aviation traffic, for example? Do you have regional needs, emergency needs? So the first applications of advanced air mobility are going to be emergency services, fire, police. The other ones are going to be probably cargo, last mile delivery, and then eventually passengers. But the time is now to start planning. If you're doing a master plan update, the FAA is being supportive on adding advanced air mobility into your master plan. I personally have done UAS and AAM forecasts to get an idea of what this would mean in terms of passenger numbers, operations numbers, and that way you can start planning for infrastructure at your airport or in your facilities for the future, right? So if we're saying this is, like full operations, maybe not in your area, not regional yet, but let's say 5 years down the road, that's right at the beginning of your short-term master planning efforts. So 0 to 5 years, then 5 to 10. Now in that medium forecast range, you will probably start seeing some of these advanced air mobility operations near or at your airport. So the time is now to make sure that you have areas reserved for those type of operations. And again, like, as I said before, engage your stakeholders early, even if there's not an operations plan. Talk to your stakeholders, talk to your local city, talk to your state, talk to your commercial businesses. Hey, are you guys looking at advanced air mobility? What are your thoughts on this? How can we help you as an airport? And then lastly, the state DOTs, Department of Transportations, are really the ones that are starting to look at this. I know that Joe Block and his team are very much into understanding what this could look like from a regional perspective, and they're usually the ones with the most information on the state of the union, but also on, hey, how do we look at this as a whole system, and how can we help you? So that's important. In our experience, having worked with DOTs, for example, here in Florida with the FDOT, they already started establishing advanced air mobility and system planning guidelines that included advanced air mobility, electrification, and things of that nature. So it's a wealth of knowledge that they typically have. So having said that, gosh, I nailed it on the head. It's 10:50, Jackson and Joe. I will actually leave it open for questions with 10 minutes to go.
Okay, great. Thank you. I see that there are two here already, and for
Okay.
anybody that's listening, please feel free to continue to submit questions. The first one here is just a quick one.
Yeah.
Are there technical certifications needed for planning or site inspections?
Technical certification for I wish I could expand upon that a little bit. Can you say it one more time, Jackson?
Sure. Are there technical certifications needed for planning or site inspections?
Specific to advanced air mobility, they would be the same as if you were planning for new aviation operations. There's not a lot of specific, not that I know of, in terms of advanced air mobility elements. What the technical specs are basically, the you make to make sure that you use the latest FAA or state guidelines when it comes to implementing that infrastructure. So that'll be your source for that.
Okay. And this other one is kind of a longer one, so it might help if you pull it up yourself
Yep.
too.
I'm
Given
in the chat. Oh, that's the Q&A. That's why
the
I'm not
Q&A,
seeing it.
right?
Okay, I got you. Oh, it's from Zach. Excellent. Okay. All right, so I can read this one. Given the current limitations of battery technology and Beta's investment in conventional takeoff and landing electric aircraft, did Orlando's smart city plan consider initial increases in demand on traditional airport infrastructure at all, or is it primarily vertiport focused? That's an excellent question. It's interesting. The airport operators, everybody tends to be more vertically focused. Um, it's the general aviation airports. Like if you look around Orlando, Kissimmee, Orlando Executive Airport, they're the ones that are really looking into that more in terms of the need for that type of runway. My understanding from Beta is that the conventional aircraft need a runway between 3 to 5,000 feet. So that's right within the range of most general aviation airports. But the larger airports like Orlando International, they're all about vertical, just because they don't want necessarily more types of smaller general aviation aircraft to mix with commercial traffic. So that's why that type of commitment, we're seeing that at the smaller airports, to answer that question.
Okay,
Um,
awesome.
I'm gonna go ahead and ask one, Jackson, well, and give folks an opportunity to throw anything else in the Q&A while we still got Finn here.
Yeah,
Finn, when you were talking about the Syracuse master plan,
yeah.
specifically for that passenger site, I noticed that the ARF building was like right next to that proposed vertiport on the airport. Was that intentional, having it located next to that ARF facility, or was that kind of just a coincidence?
It was intentional, not necessarily for advanced air mobility, Joe. It was intentional because that's one of those areas that was identified as suitable land, land that's basically ready to go for cargo, ARF, and advanced air mobility. So we tied them together as some of those areas are being looked at for other commercial opportunities.
Okay,
Yes,
gotcha.
but it makes sense if there's a battery fire for that to be close. But it was semi-coincidental. I'll answer it that way.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. And
It's one
then
of those
I'll ask.
master planning things that just come, hey, wait a minute, this is the perfect site for all three.
It seems to make a lot of sense, and I don't fully know the ARF requirements implications for advanced air mobility with some of the concerns around the high voltage electrical systems. But that seems
Yeah,
to be something that insurers would probably like to see is being close to a facility like that.
yeah,
Um, Another question for you, Finn. For the microgrid part of that master plan update as well, looking at all those alternatives.
yeah,
Can you just share a little bit more information about like what all was a part of that microgrid? Like what components all make up the microgrid? As an
sure.
example, right? Like is there like a battery as part of that system,
Yeah.
and what are we talking about?
There's different ones, right? So it really depends on what you have at your airport. If you look at places like Pittsburgh, where there's geothermal, for example, so they have a geothermal type microgrid. There's some facilities in Europe, like in my home airport in Amsterdam Schiphol, that are 100% wind power, but they have basically battery storage based on that wind power, and it ties into the grid. For a place like Syracuse, it would be partially solar. If they already have one solar farm, even though the sun doesn't shine that much there, that's part of it. But mostly it would be battery chargers. That company I was referring to earlier, Alpha Structures, they actually got the green light to install a battery style microgrid on top of Terminal 4 at JFK, and that's where they're starting, right? So it's a repository from there. There will be some solar, there will be some other alternative energy that would make up that microgrid. Another one that I've recently heard of, which is interesting, and it's not. I don't think it's 100% green, and the microgrid doesn't have to be 100% green. But in Puerto Rico right now, we're planning a project that uses natural gas burning natural gas or through a pipeline that then reaches the airport and turns into a microgrid for additional energy requirements. So Syracuse is looking at kind of a hybrid there, depending on what they have in their area.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, absolutely. And oh, here we go. There's Ryan. I know Ryan. First of all, great presentation, Finn. Thank you. Broad question for you or maybe Joe. Are there any airports in Minnesota that are known to be considering advanced air mobility as part of an active master planning process? Joe, I'm going to refer to you on that one since I know a little bit, but not enough to be dangerous in Minnesota.
Yeah, I figured that was going to get kicked over my way. There are a couple airports in the Twin Cities area that have been interested in advanced air mobility as part of kind of the next iteration of the master plan process update. I haven't had a lot of airports that have reached out specifically that have said, "Hey, look, we're including it in the next master plan, and we're going to keep you guys updated on what that looks like." So there hasn't been a whole lot so far in terms of Minnesota airports that have reached out to me or to the team that at least I know of. Finn, maybe just broadening it up. Any other airports that you know of across the country that have included it in their master plan updates?
Yeah, we're starting to see it more frequently. It obviously depends on the states where these things are pretty pertinent. And again, I think every state is pertinent, but New Hampshire is looking at it from a system planning perspective, coming out here in the next couple of weeks, is my understanding. Places like Tampa, Miami. I can tell you in New England, Nantucket, some of those harder to reach places. Hyannis, from small to large. We're seeing it everywhere, but from a master plan perspective, I think Syracuse is one of those examples that others are following. But there's definitely a trend in that direction.
And a couple more that I'll add in that I know of as well. In Washington State specifically, I know a lot of airports are starting to include it in the master plans there. There actually was a group of 6 airports that all came together for a recent grant application. I think it was the RAISE grant to apply for EV chargers, landside, airside, at those airports to kind of create like this network of airports in the state to support electric aviation and other e-mobility options. So maybe a little bit similar to what we're doing with the MEAN study, Minnesota Electric Aviation Network. But anyways.
Yeah, and I think the next step to that is, if it is in your master plan, why do we do a master plan? So that's to ascertain funding mechanisms and federal funding for infrastructure. It remains to be seen if a master plan gets approved or an ALP gets approved, that then there's federal funding for those type of facilities for vertiports. And I think that would be the next step. But since the FAA is allowing that to be in a master plan and they're looking at it from a forecasting perspective, it's logical to say that eventually they're gonna maybe pay for some of that infrastructure, whether it's apron, whether it's taxiway related or tie-ins to the system. That would definitely be the next logical step.
Yeah, and there's definitely pressure, I think, on the Hill from some of the industry groups to push that from the congressional level to make sure that FAA is responsive to that.
100%. There's one more. I don't know if because we're at time here, Jackson and Joe. Can we go over just a slight bit or do we?
Yeah, it looks like it's not really a question either, just a statement for us.
Gotcha. Okay, yes. Some Minnesota love St. Paul downtown. An MAC airport is going through an AM alternatives analysis, part of their ongoing long-term plan. Awesome. That's good to hear. Good stuff.
Okay. Well, it is 10 o'clock. So I am just going to wrap up briefly with a request for everybody, and that is to please complete the evaluation. I think it's coming. Can you guys see that? Yes.
We
Okay.
can. Yep.
Great. Yeah, please, if you're listening, take a minute or two to let us know what you thought about this webinar. I'll put a link here in the chat as well. We do look at those. They are super helpful for planning future webinars. So please, again, take a couple minutes. And thank you to Finn. Thank you to Joe for your expertise today.
Hey, thank you, Jackson. Thank you, Joe. Thanks all for having me. Really, that was a lot of fun. Appreciate you.
Thanks for your time, Finn.
Anytime. Cheers.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
You too.